This is a collaboration with Rebecca from Mornings at the Allotment. Make sure you check out her video and others in this series. Hashtag Late But Great Gardens. Welcome back to Sow, Grow and Cook. It's the middle of August. I'm looking out the window and it's raining again and it's cool. It's about 17 degrees centigrade, which is 60 something degrees Fahrenheit. Mild, damp. I guess depending on where you come from, it would be considered chilly. It's been a really odd year weather-wise for the garden. I wonder what it's like where you're at. I've been growing food for well over 30 years now. I started in our family back garden, and then I had my own allotments, and more recently, the last couple of years, here on our small holding in West Wales. Personally, I think every gardening season has challenging weather, certainly here in the UK, and I know that there's been challenging weather all around the world. There's been wildfires, droughts, floods. It's been terrible, especially this year. And if you're new to gardening and you've suffered with slugs and cold weather and wet or drought or what have you, it can be so frustrating to not get any food crops at the end of all that effort and all those dreams and aspirations of growing something for yourself and being a little bit self-sufficient. I say, don't give up. Tip number one, and for me, this is like probably the most important tip. Keep a diary. Buy a cheap notebook from a shop. Write down everything to do with your gardening year. The seeds that you've planted, when you've planted them, how long it took for them to germinate, what the weather was like when you put them out, how well they grew. Did your family like the things that you planted? Would you grow them again? What trouble did you have? What were they affected by? What was the weather like? Keeping track of the weather is quite important. It can give you some useful information the following year. Tip number 2, respect the weather forecast. I didn't do that last year. I thought I knew better. These tomatoes are crimson plum and they're woven around some baling twine attached to a clothesline strung between the crop bars in the polytunnel. And I've got some crimson crush and some Ukrainian purple tomatoes. Now, I'm now just getting a nice harvest in August. We've got a few ripe ones here. I pick, every other day. I planted these tomatoes quite late in the polytunnel this year. I think it was pretty much the end of May, even though they were getting protection from the polytunnel. The reason being that last year I got caught out. I planted them earlier because we had a lovely warm spell in late April. And then in early May we had a bit of a cold snap, quite a significant frost, and I thought they were going to be okay. They were healthy, sturdy plants. They were under cover. I didn't really believe the weather forecast, and lo and behold, I lost quite a lot of tomato plants as a result. In fact, out of the 30 that I'd planted, I had about 12 that that survived. Fortunately, I had a lot of spare plants, but it was quite devastating, and I will never make the mistake of ignoring weather forecasts. And another thing I've also learned is that polytunnels offer protection from the wind and the cold up to a point, and a lot of protection from the rain. But when there's significant cold outside, it doesn't actually protect that much, particularly at night. You need light in here in order to sort of up the temperatures. So what I should have done was cover those tomato plants, or better yet, wait until the weather was a little bit more settled. Thank you, Mr. Cockerel. So this year I planted much later, and as a result things are cropping a little bit later, but I'm getting rather a nice harvest. And so much about gardening, especially when you're growing your own food, is the courage to be patient and try new things, and always have some spare plants in supply. Okay, here's another example of things growing differently from one year to the next. Here's my winter squash patch. It looks pretty magnificent right now. I planted the plants quite early in the greenhouse, brought them in at night to make sure they stayed warm. I think I must have planted the seeds at the end of March to ensure that I had big healthy plants by the time it came to planting them, which would normally be around here, the end of May, maybe the first week in June, depending on what the weather's doing. They did fine, and then on the I think it was about the third week in June, we had a very unexpected ground frost. Now, I would never expect there to be a frost in the third week of June. And it did damage some of the plants, which I'll show you in a photo here. Fortunately, the plants were strong enough and healthy enough, and the frost wasn't so severe or so prolonged, more than one evening, that it killed the entire plant off. So they did come back, no problem, and they're doing pretty well at the moment. You can see some of the squashes. These are Uchiki Kuri, which are a smallish winter squash, good for 2 people. I tried growing blue Hubbard squash the first year we were here. They did really well, but they were so big that once you cut them open, unless you had masses of freezer space or wanted to eat nothing but soup for a month, they were just a little bit too big. Tip number 3, always plant extra. If, like me, you've messed up by planting something too early and the frost gets it, or you've just been unlucky and the slugs have eaten something, if you've got some spares, you have instant replacements. So it's always a good idea to plant extra. If you don't need them, if you're lucky and you don't need them, swap them for something else with a friend, or give them away to somebody who might need some. There's always something you can do with them, or you can just plant extras and have extra whatever. But there's usually somebody who's happy to take your spares off you if necessary. Failing that, you can always offload those extra courgettes on someone's doorstep. Tip number 4, which is similar to tip number 3, and that is, don't be afraid to try planting whatever it was again, but later. The example I'm going to use are French beans. I planted some 1 April in little pots, put them out in the garden towards the end of May. The frost killed them, and I was persuaded by a more experienced gardening friend to sow some again and put them out in the garden at a later date. I didn't think there would be enough time. By the time they were in the garden, I think it was last week in June, might have been the beginning of July, they grew fantastic. The weather was settled and they grew really quickly. They caught up with all the other beans that I'd grown, the other varieties, and I had a really decent crop in the end. So don't be afraid to plant things a little bit later. They often will catch up. And finally, if you're new to growing food for yourself, please don't give up if you feel that you've not done particularly well, or the weather's been unkind or unhelpful in your particular area. Everyone has successes and failures. I have had so many failures over the 30-odd years I've been gardening. I've had plants that have fried to a crisp during drought and hot weather. I've had massive slugs this big just demolish everything. I can't remember which year that was. 2011 I think was the year of the mega big slug, and I thought, God, am I ever going to be able to grow anything ever again? I did. We've had floods, we've had all kinds of terrible things, but we always end up having something to pick and show for it, and it's such a delight when you can bring something into your home and wash it and cook it and eat it, something that you've grown yourself. It's a fantastic life skill. You need to keep trying. Don't be discouraged. Talk to other more experienced gardeners, watch YouTube videos, read books. Just don't give up. It's so worth doing.